my dad said he wouldn't give me a job, so I had to show him.
Right.
So I went and got a job, and I coordinated an AFI movie that was a $250,000 grant, and then one did a couple movies for Ashok Amartraj, who then went on to become a pretty big producer.
Yeah.
But in the days that he was doing small indies, so yeah, been around for a while.
Wow. And so, did you ever go and get your degree, or you?
No, I kept working. I wanted to go back to study. I went back to UCLA because I kept, I started writing, and I thought, God, I'm a big fat liar, right? I don't really know what I'm doing. So I went and took a class, and I still felt like I didn't know what I was doing. But then at the end of the semester, the professor asked me to come and be his TA. And I kind of went, okay, if I'm lying to you and pulling it off, I don't need to be here. I need to be either with somebody who calls me on my lie, that I don't know what I'm doing, or just keep writing. So I just kept on writing. And everybody that I talked to, I had a lot of friends at that point who were in grad school for film, who said, listen, if you're not planning to direct, which I never was, your best experience is on the ground. Read a lot of scripts, talk to a lot of people, go learn how to make movies, rather than have this fantastical ideas of what it is. So I went and kept working in production, wrote a script, was lucky enough to get it optioned, then sold, had a big agency packaging it, and found out I didn't want to be a writer, which I consider the greatest gift of my life.
Well, you had said that you enjoyed giving notes, but it was tougher to receive them.
I think it had to do with youth. I think it also had to do with my idea of the process from the writer's side that didn't mesh up with reality. I like developing material. I have a problem, especially in the 90s, which was a time where anybody could be a development executive. And so you had development executives that weren't necessarily qualified, who would give you notes about a movie in small town America going, well, maybe we can do this in Mexico. Can it be a Mexican family? Because I always wanted to go to Mexico on vacation. So maybe we could go live there for a few months. And you just go, wow, what am I supposed to do with that? So it was, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy creativity by consensus. A lot of my writers love it, and I can certainly help them navigate through it. For me, it wasn't the thing. I would much rather develop material and work with writers than be the writer. To me, that was just a miserable experience. Doesn't mean it's miserable for anybody else, but for me, it just wasn't a fit. So I was lucky enough to know enough people to be able to quickly make the transition into development and start developing material.
Do you think that because you didn't have the pressure of student loans, that a lot of people that come here, and I also left at 17 and don't have a degree, and so I have a similar background in that sense, and you don't have the pressure of student loans and having to pay those off, that you're able to do stuff that's a little more creative and free?
Yeah, but I also, I was independent at a very early age, so for me it was rent. For me it was self-sustaining. I didn't, my parents were very much about, we want you to stand on your own 2 feet, which was fantastic. I think it gave me freedom, but I also, honestly, I very rarely see people make choices specifically because of their student loans. I wish they made more choices that would directly influence that. But my experience with film was always, you can study film appreciation. You need to see all the classics, and I've taken those classes over the years, ad nauseum. But for me, film and filmmaking is a very practical experience. So being on the ground, that was why I did it. It wasn't, I didn't want to take on the student loan or any of those things. It just really wasn't something that attracted me. I kind of felt like, why stop this train, right, of going out there and making movies and being in the industry and making contacts and being part of it, to go be in school in a make-believe world. Let's pretend that we're going to write something that's going to end up on the screen. Most films, most screenplays that are written in academia never see the light of days. Most movies you never make a feature in college. I made features all the time. I mean, I was production coordinator, production manager on them, but that was the world that I live in. So for me, it always felt like if I'm already in it, and I can take these classes between shoots and at night and go to film appreciation, film history, and study Godard and Fellini and all of those great filmmakers, and understand shot composition and directing rules and all of those things. Why do I need to stop? Why do I need to stop and go back to college for 4 years? It felt to me then like a step back. Of course, it's great to have a degree, but I don't find that in filmmaking, specifically for writers, a degree in screenwriting is what makes a career. I actually feel that film school is a lot more important for directors, because you get that short, you get those connections, you get to be the top short at USC or at UCLA or at Columbia College or NYU. It really is a place for a director to kind of cut his teeth and get a quality short together. Then again, and I will argue that side because I'm a Gemini, so that duality is always warring. In this day and age, with the access to digital filmmaking, you can make a great short anywhere. But I do think the directors need more incubating and considering how to storyboard something. Why do you storyboard it that way? What are the choices that you're making, director? What is the color composition of the shot? All of those things, I think that falls into play a lot more in film school than writing for writers. I think that I used to make a greater impact going through film school with a focus on screenwriting than it does today.
Lee, in your bio, you say that the writers that you've seen make it or have success often know their strengths and weaknesses, are very self-aware. That's great, but who do they actually trust to tell them the truth about that? Because so many people will say, oh, you're so wonderful, but there's like a hidden agenda, and then there's vice versa. There's sort of the poisonous playmates, as Julia Cameron calls them.
You have to find the people that you trust. I mean, listen, the reality is that this is a two-sided coin. On one side, nobody likes confrontation. Nobody wants to be the bad friend that told you that, you stink, you sweat too much, so change your, nobody wants to have those conversations about what doesn't work, because they want to be your friends and they want to have wine with you and they want to kick back and they don't want the weight of they said something uncomfortable to you. On the other end, you have the people who are not at your level, who just want to kind of hang on and see where you're going and everything you do is great and brilliant and fantastic. It really is a hunch. It really is about finding the people that you trust to tell you the good and bad. I generally don't, and this is me, and this is not politically correct, I find that you can't be on the side of the writer and the side of the sale at the same time, which is why I work the way that I work, because if I'm invested in selling something, my first priority stops being the writer and it starts being putting money in my bank, right? So I think that you have to find people whose job is to be honest with you. It used to be managers that were a lot more hands-on with creative development, career development, but because the business model changed so aggressively in 2008 after the 2008 strike, very few still have that luxury. Managers used to have a small roster of 15, 20 people. Now I see many of my friends in management who used to have small rosters suddenly with 30, 40, 50 clients, because now it takes twice the time to break a writer or sell a script for half the money. So you have to load your roster if you want to keep making the same money that you did. So you have to find people who are not invested in necessarily in making money off of you, but are invested in your long-term best interest, who will be honest with you, who are not competing with you. Competition element is always tough, because the moment you have competition, there inevitably and subconsciously are other emotions that come into play that may taint why someone is saying something. So you really do have to find your team that you can always go back to. I had a writer years ago who wrote a script that had a lot of heat on it, and he was signed by CAA, and I kept telling him, you have to get a manager. You have to get somebody who's on your side who'll give it to you straight. I wasn't coaching at that time yet, but he came to me through Script Shark, which I was running for 6.5 years. We became quite friendly. I gave him some advice, and my advice was find somebody on your side, not on the side of selling the script. Ultimately, the script fizzled out, and he fizzled out in such a drastic and dramatic fashion. He made such mistakes that nobody at the big agency that signed him was going to stop and train him on it, or talk him through it, or consider the option, or say, don't you ever freaking say that. he was effectively put on stage to perform, didn't know how to perform, thought that he did, which was a huge mistake. And so everything fizzled. If he had somebody in his ear who was coaching him, who was training him, who knew what the hell they were talking about, that mistake wouldn't have happened. But he was, his movie or his screenplay that was very much the talk of the town disappeared overnight. He fizzled and was dropped by the agency from one day to the next, based on very simple mistakes that the writer made, that had he had somebody invested in him and not in just the money, would have been different.
How does a writer become more self-aware if they don't have representation? They don't have anybody yet in their camp. They're new, but they want to learn what mistakes are they making. From something as simple as even going in to pitch something and how they're presenting themselves.
Well, the thing is, first of all, there's the script element, right? So you want to expose the work early and often to people that you can trust, or that there is no negative impact if they don't like the work. So readers, consultants, you want to get feedback from people in the know, writers groups, other writers that you respect, your mother, your best friend, your husband, your wife, your kid. Love them, they don't count unless they are, Kelly Masterson, who just wrote Snowpiercer. Sure, if you're married to Kelly Masterson, go get his 2 cents, and by all means. But short of that, you want to find, on the script front, first of all, you want to find people that will give you script feedback that is knowledgeable and seasoned. So it can't be just anybody. I don't like notes from anonymous sources, because if I don't know who's giving the notes, how do I know to trust the notes? And then when it comes to things like this, like Story Expo pitch events, you want to walk in prepped. I can tell you that, for example, for me, I do preps with my writers. I did 8 sessions of prep with one writer for one event, going over the pitch, going over the one sheet, making sure that it's coming off the right way, making sure I'm getting no distractions. That same writer went to writer friends, to writers who are showrunners, who become showrunners, writers who are writing in rooms, and ran the pitch by them to really prepare and practice. There are a lot of people that walk into pitch event and think, oh, I can just wing it. The reality is that in today's world, there's enough resources out there to not have to wing it. You can walk in prepared. So whether you work with somebody like me or somebody like Stephanie Palmer, who works on pitching, or read Michael Haig, Selling Your Script in 60 Seconds, you have some starting points to really start planning and preparing, because ultimately luck favors the prepared.
Lee, what's the first step in writing a screenplay?
First step in writing a screenplay is making sure that you have a really solid, great idea. Without that killer idea, it doesn't matter how technically sound the script is, it's just not going to resonate. So you have to make sure that the idea, which is the foundation of the script, is solid, is interesting, is different, is exciting. A friend of mine, Dwayne Alexander, wrote a book a few years ago. Dwayne Smith, why I keep calling him by his middle name, Dwayne Alexander Smith. Dwayne Smith wrote a book, 10 Simple Fucking Rules for Writing a Great Fucking Screenplay. And 9 of his rules were somewhat technical, and 1 rule was the big idea. And what he said in that book was, listen, I can teach you those 9 other rules, but if you don't follow the 10th, the big idea rule, you're not going to have a script. Because it really is about, and you see this in the pitch rooms, you see this, we're now in an event where people are walking in pitching work that they started 6 months ago or a year ago or a year and a half or 2 years ago, whatever it is. They're walking in, they're pitching. If they don't have that big idea to sell, nobody's reading the work. Because it is about that big idea. It is about that unique character that we haven't seen before. It's about that world that we haven't been in. It's about a conflict that's unique and different. Now, it can always been argued there are 8 great themes, they've all been done and redone, fantastic. But we're still finding new ways to tell great movies. Take, for example, things like, I don't know why I keep going back to Kelly Masterson, but Before the Devil Knows You're Dead. Amazing story, Shakespearean quality, fantastic script, totally different, amazing. Look at movies like Run Lola Run. Look at movies that are as simple as Boyhood. It's a different way to tell a story. And what we want to see from a writer is, what is your unique point of view? What is your unique story? So for me, the first and most important step is picking that idea that has real legs, whether it's for a screenplay or for a television pilot. what is unique about it, what's different about it, what's the same about it, so that I can understand where it fits in. It's not too radical. We're not creating whole new worlds, but there is something here that is interesting to me that I haven't seen in this form before. First it's that, then it's starting to outline, to really beat out an idea and see, does it hold? You really have to do those preparatory steps before you jump into the script, because it's much easier figuring out an outline if it doesn't work than figuring out 3 drafts, 500 pages, and 2 years later that you just can't make it work. So you do have to go through those steps. You do have to fix the work. You do have to make sure that it holds, that it has enough promise. Screenwriting is ultimately an iterative process. Nobody gets it right the first time. You're not supposed to. There's a reason why they call the first draft the vomit draft. So you have to go through those iterations. Once you have that idea, you have to give it the right treatment in order to get it to a place where it can be a solid, promising, full of potential piece of work that has some real legs.
If you were going to arm a screenwriter with one tool or weapon, what would it be?
I'm assuming we're talking weapons of
screenwriting,
writing,
yeah,
not weapons
not
of
for
war.
walking down the street, yeah.
Oh gosh, that is a really good question. Writing-wise, it will always be the ability to outline. That to me is one of those tools that are completely underrated, that are rarely taught, but are integral, because I can tell you all of my clients who are represented, before they go to script, it's always show me the outline. And this is not something they're traditionally taught. So for me, the ability to outline cohesively in 5 pages, 10 pages, 18 pages, that is the tool that to me is just underrated and absolutely crucial. So far as industry tools, I would like to grant them more confidence, less bravado, more confidence. So the ability to walk in comfortably and start building relationships, because truly this is a business of relationships. And certainly I want all my writers to be able to pitch well and whatnot, but it starts with a certain level of believing in the value of the work, truly understanding it, and being able to parlay that in a room. So that is an incredibly important tool for me, the ability to walk into a room, to start to network, to make some relationships.
Can you give me an example of bravado versus real confidence?
Bravado versus real confidence is quite simple. This is the greatest script ever. Oh my God, it's going to make $500 million domestically because it's the greatest thing that was ever written. That's bravado. It's completely baseless. It doesn't speak to anything other than the writer's fantasy. Confidence speaks to the ability of a writer to sit down and say, I want to talk to you about something that I wrote that I'm really excited about. I wrote it inspired by my relationship with my father, who was a forensic psychologist who also happened to abuse his mother and children. This is somebody who can just sit down and talk about the work. And there's a difference. I feel that a lot of writers make a lot of empty promises about the work. And I see it in pitches all the time. I mean, I went over a pitch with a team of writers a few days ago who said, oh, this is just the greatest conspiracy ever in the history of America. Why? What happened? What the hell are you talking about? Talk to me about what it is rather than what you want it to be or how powerful you want me to see it as. I find that writers who are confident in the work, who have done the work, and it's only writers who've done the work, who've gotten notes, who've gotten the feedback, that can walk in truly confident, they can walk in and just talk to you about the work. They don't need to do an interpretive dance to go along with it. They don't need to promise you that it'll make millions of dollars or that Americans will tune in every Friday night in droves to see this show. They know what the work is. So it's the confidence to be able to sit down, talk about the work as a professional to another professional on the other side of the table.
Advice to a screenwriter working on their first screenplay and thinking they're going to sell it, move to Malibu. We had another guy in this chair that always used the word Malibu as sell it, Malibu, money comes. But that notion that first screenplay is going to be it for them and launch them.
For the first bit of advice that I have is you're not going to sell it. A first script is a learning script. I was teaching class yesterday, and I told the writers, if you're pitching a script that is your first script, don't ever say, this is my first script. Because the minute that we hear, people like me hear, this is my first script, we know this is your learning script. You're going to learn how to write on your first, second, third script. By the fourth script, you're going to get kind of good. By the fifth script, you'll really have a handle on your voice. So there is no selling that first script. I literally don't know anybody, literally, who sold their first script in recent years. I mean, granted, last night I interviewed Scott Alexander and Larry Kurzowski, who wrote Ed Wood, Larry Flint, Man in the Moon, and they did manage to sell their first script, but this was in 1980 something. And they said in the room, this is clearly not the way that it's done. So in all likelihood, odds are you're not going to sell your first. You got to love it. You got to put your heart into it. But you have to understand that this is an intellectual exercise in learning how to write screenplays. You really do have to see it as your training piece. So if you have 5 ideas and one you love and it's the one that you think is going to make you $1 million, hold that back. Work on your skill before you invested in it, because oftentimes I'll talk to my writers who are newer writers, and we'll talk about where a script is at, and they will say to me, I think I brought it as far as I can bring it skill-wise at this point. I need to set it aside. If I wanted to go further, I need to revisit it in a year or 2 years when I've worked on other stuff, which is the right assumption. What a writer should expect is that it's going to take 3 to 10 years to break into the entertainment industry. That's what it takes. This is what we see day in and day out. It is hardly ever done in shorter spurts. I know somebody watching this will go, well, I'm the one who's going to do it, and more power to you. But this is just the general expectations. I have both clients and friends who are breaking in all the time, every day. They're all working at it for years, and that's okay. This is what it takes. This is how it works. In all likelihood, you're not selling your first. If your first can get you some exposure, fantastic. But we are in an industry where right now, we're in the beginning of September, we sold 43 specs this year. That's an abysmal number. So we're not selling a lot of product right now. It's going to change. We're going to sell more. But the likelihood of selling a script in a market where roughly 80,000 scripts are getting registered a year with the WGA and 41 or 43 are selling within 8-9 months, not high. You just have to run the numbers. It is a lottery.
So save that passion project, because I've heard a lot of people here today that want to write about something that happened to them when they were younger, whatever, and they're very close to the material. Maybe that one that they think is going to change everything that's very personal to them, hold back on that, you're saying. Work on 5 or 6 others that maybe aren't as...
Perfect your script. You become a better writer. This is a skill-based craft. Your skill gets stronger and stronger, your muscle gets stronger and stronger the more you write. So you do have to keep writing and perfecting your craft in order to get to a place where you can write those really hard to execute scripts.
The screenwriting process, the first week of the screenplay versus the last week. How different, how challenging?
Listen, the first week is all promise, right? It's all hope and promise of what this thing will become. The last week is often exhaustion, some feeling of triumph, some feeling of disappointment. The movie in the head as opposed to the movie on the page. Should be a successful moment. You know, for me, a writer who keeps writing on the work should keep writing on the work to get to a point where it's inspiring, where it's exciting, where they're happy with it. So there should be some feeling of relief. Usually the week after the last week of a script is the week of mourning. You no longer have those characters waiting for you. You are on to the next thing. You're starting something that is very raw, very rough. So it definitely goes through a real arc, the writing process. And the writer goes through a huge migration going from first week to last week. Oftentimes there's months, sometimes even years between them.